send it to Africa, and how many children could that keep alive over there? What if my insurance company could send that $1 million over there? How many children could they keep alive? Could they save from AIDS with that money? And it's honestly it's something that that I feel guilty about. That I'm so lucky to have had come from the family that I did, where I had the resources that I had the insurance that I did have, that I do have for now. But I think about it all the time.
How long has this been going on for?
Well, it's been going on, and ask your parents, since early childhood, some degree, some manifestations of that Ehlers-Danlos.
So the one thing that we certainly noticed is that she would sprain joints a whole lot, and we ended up having to take her to Ehlers-Danlos Children's Hospital. But we didn't know what that was. We just thought that maybe she was into sports and athletics, but was very prone to, like, hurting a wrist or an ankle. And so there was a lot of many visits to the ER. And what we subsequently found out was that was a big part of her connective tissue disease, the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So it really wasn't until she actually had a major injury at the age of 12 and started having a lot of pain, a lot of back problems, a lot of neck problems, very severe headaches, that we were, alarmed and taking her to doctors. And she was not actually diagnosed till she was 15, because they finally, did an MRI and found out that she had the Chiari malformation in the syringomyelia. I think that Joanna has said that she was experiencing things in her body that she thought were normal for because that's all she had known, but they weren't things that we were necessarily, observing. I think there were days that she didn't feel good and didn't want to go to school, and looking back on that, it could be that, she was already having these problems that we didn't know about.
I would say that one of the biggest lessons that I would emphasize that Cindy mentioned is about not being sure whether behavior was strictly age-related adolescent behavior or what might be behind it, and finding out later that it really was driven by pain and discomfort. And I have repeated numerous times what Joanna told me at one point after she got some adequate care, that she had been having headaches that were like what we call brain freeze, what you have when you eat something that's too cold, but they didn't go away. And I was aware that when that's happened to me, it's passed in a few seconds, and to try to figure out what it's like to have that be present continuously is very impactful. And she was going to school and trying to perform as a normal kid while that was going on. But she said that she didn't realize that it was abnormal. So, and then when she was in the hospital with other children, and we were interacting with their parents, we found out that that was actually a fairly common experience, to think that behavior was bad behavior when it was actually really, or difficult behavior when it was actually driven by physical discomfort.
But she's a very wise person, right?
Extremely wise.
So when did you first note that she was just a wise person, separate from any physical issue? When she was 2 years old, 3 years old?
I don't know that. I'm not sure that I would necessarily. What I noticed is she was very bright. Okay, that Joanna was very, very smart. That from very early on, her command of language was amazing, and that she was very able to discuss and talk about things, and look at the world, especially how things would be helpful, for her, in the way that she was able to perceive the world. And I remember very early on thinking that she's going to be a lawyer, because she can talk anybody into anything. or out of anything. So I was very aware of that when she was really young.
Well, I just have this image of Joanna being about 2 feet tall with her feet spread and her fists on her hips, telling me what she's going to have. She's asserted herself from the very beginning. She's a very strong individual.
And I think it really was a little later when that kind of smart, bright intelligence was focused on her health that she actually also developed more of a philosophy of the world and an appreciation of how to live with crisis and pain and find a way to think of it in a positive. And I think it was really one of the things that she did when she first was diagnosed. She got involved with the national organization called WACMA, which is World Arnold Chiari Malformation Association, and got really involved in working with families and with children. And that was the beginning of where I think she felt like she had some purpose. And from there, I think this whole sense of philosophy and deepening being in the world, her wisdom developed from that.
But I wanted to share one of my wonderful, wonderful memories about this is that being in the hospital up in New York for one of her first neurosurgeries, and there was a little boy, Noah, who she got very, very, very close with. And he was having surgery, and she had surgery. She was in so much pain and miserable and uncomfortable, and all she wanted to do was just go and visit Noah and play with him. And he was like 6, and she was probably like 15, 16, and she would find games and toys, and we took pictures of it. They'd lie in bed together and cuddle because neither of them had much energy at all. And Joanna just meant so much to Noah, and Noah fell in love with Joanna, and Joanna fell in love with Noah. Really, Noah would say, "This is my wife, Joanna." And they had this wonderful relationship. And then the next time they were both there, and he's from Raleigh, North Carolina, so we got very close with Noah's mother, Susan, and because we were in the hospital so much at the same time. And then another time that they were in the hospital, they were both on isolation, and they weren't allowed to leave their rooms. And she talked to her doctor and convinced her doctor that Noah and Joanna should share a room, because up in New York there are no private rooms, and so you have to have a roommate. So she convinced her doctors, and so for seriously 3 weeks, because Susan was there with Noah and I was there with Joanna, and the 4 of us were in the same room for 3 weeks with the 2 of them in isolation, and they were not allowed to leave the room. So it was a pretty difficult time, but the 2 of them were marvelous together. And I think having each other, and I think Joanna, being the older, she was like, to Noah she was his wife, but to Joanna he was like her little brother. And she just was determined. She was on a mission to help get him through, and doing that helped her get through.
She has a team of really dedicated physicians.
She does. Plus, she is very well self-educated between her family and her own research that she does.
She's out of me, any nurse, any doctor, her parents, anybody, she is almost 100% of the time her best advocate. And I think it almost is a good distraction for her to actually treat her treatment and her recovery and so on as a job, really. She is even when she's heavily medicated or whatever, her thoughts are incredibly well organized. Mistakes with a drug being administered or something like that are rare because she catches them. It's amazing how alert she's able to stay.
I really appreciate how watching her learn how to be her own advocate and doing the research and the education that she's done from early on. When she found out, she was first diagnosed when she was 15, and she immediately